Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I've gotten a lot of questions recently regarding how do you go about choosing a jig head that has different line tie angles. So in this case, this is a 60 degree. You can get jig heads that have 90 degree. You can get jig heads that are 30 degree. You can kind of get hooks at various degrees all over the place. So the question is, when would you choose a 30 degree over a 60 degree or over a 90 degree and vice versa? I get a lot of questions about this, and it's not necessarily just jig heads. It really comes into play with almost any form of bait that has a direct hook that's poured. So it could be your swim jigs, could be your vibrating jigs, your swim baits. It could be even down to your shaky heads as well as, like a Ned rig. So from that standpoint, generally speaking, what we see is certain techniques definitely are dominated by a certain angle of hook. So, like, let's talk about your swim baits a little bit. Swim baits generally, I would say, come more with your 90-degree line tie. So, a 90 degree would mean your line tie is here, it goes down to the shank of the hook, takes a 90 degree, and then follows the shank of the hook down to the hook point. In this case, the benefits of a 90 degree are a couple of things. One, your bait generally tends to want to stay deeper when you retrieve it. If you're using a 30 degree, it wants to run a little bit higher. So if you're fishing deeper water and you want your bait to stay deeper, a 90 degree is going to give you a slight benefit over other lesser degree line ties. Another real good key though is if you're, let's say you're tight lining a swim bait or you're vertical jigging a swim bait or maybe Demiki rigging under the boat. At that point, a 90 degree is going to be more beneficial because a 90 degree at rest will want to sit more horizontal in the water column. If you were to choose, say, a 30 degree, it would want to come to rest more like that. So if you're looking for a more natural presentation, in my opinion, a horizontal approach is better. So a 90 degree in that case is better. Now, the negatives to a 90 degree really come down to it being much more prone to snags. So if you're dragging this on rocks, generally what happens is that bait comes, hits a rock, wants to roll over, and then at that point, the hook point can go almost anywhere. If you retrieve it into a tree limb, gonna get snagged the majority of the time. It's just one of the issues that you run with when you're talking about a 90 degree. You run into a grass stalk, it's going to get caught around that line tie. So for me, I like a 90 degree jig head for swim baits if I'm fishing deep open water. That's generally where I like it. Now, if I'm going with something where I'm fishing heavier cover or around grass, I'm going to go with a jig head that's got a 30 degree. So in this case, just to show you, this is a core tackle swim jig. If you can see, it's got a 30 degree line tie. Well, the reason you see most swim jigs come with roughly a 30 degree line tie is because that 30 degree line tie is the first thing to hit the cover when you're retrieving that at you. And what that does is that separates the cover. So if you're fishing this through grass, it rides through grass better. It also wants to ride a little bit higher. Again, the pull point is more straight at you in terms of your retrieve. The bait's going to want to ride higher, which is something that most people really like with your swim jigs, right? If you're retrieving it over the tops of grass, or maybe you've got some lay down trees, you're retrieving it up and over, you want your bait to hit and come up over. With a 90 degree, it's going to hit, roll into the cover. The 30 degree hits and just rides up and over. So it's very snag resistant, comes through cover great. So for me, I'm going to choose more of a 30 degree line tie if I'm fishing thicker cover, shallower water. It also tends to skip better. So from that standpoint, that's what I'm looking to use. The other most popular angle is a 60 degree. So this is the core tackle tush swim bait hook. This is used for swim baits and tubes, and you can use it for Demiki rigging, but that 60 degree kind of gives you the best of both worlds. If you're fishing around a little bit of cover, you can work it through the cover still because it's not a straight 90 degree. There's still a taper. So you hit a piece of grass and it rides down underneath. But at the same time, it tends to want to stay down, maybe not stay down as deep as a 90 degree on the retrieve, but it definitely rides deeper than a 30 degree. So from that standpoint, a 60 degree gives you a little bit of both worlds, but it really comes down to the cover and the water depth that you're fishing. At least that's how I choose. If I'm fishing shallower, thicker cover, I tend to want to go with less of an angle, a 30 to 60 degree. If I'm fishing deeper, more open water, I'm going to want to go with that 60 or 90 degree. But it's important to realize the difference. And this doesn't just hold true, say, with swim baits. The same thing could be said with, say, let's say a tube head. If you're throwing a tube head and you've got a 90 degree in it, that 90 degree tube jig will not come through grass nearly as well. So if I happen to be fishing a big deep flat with sandgrass on it, I'm going to choose a tube jig head that's got a 60 degree versus a 90 degree. That will come through grass so much better than that 90 degree. If I'm fishing just an open rock vein, deep open water rock vein, or maybe a gravel bar, I probably want to choose the 90 degree tube jig over the 60. So don't just think it's limited to swim baits. It really does come into play all over the place. You can do the same with flipping jigs too. A lot of flipping jigs come with 60 degree, a lot come with 90. Just kind of depends on the cover that I'm going to be fishing. So keep that in mind, guys. Next time you go and purchase baits, make sure you look at the line tie to see what angle it's at, to see if it's going to meet the conditions and the location that you want to be using it, because it really can make a difference. And the less time you're caught and hung up, the less time you're picking grass off your bait, means you have more chances at putting more fish in the boat, because you're going to have more bites throughout the course of the day. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this answers the couple of questions that I've gotten regarding line tie angles. If so, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet to my channel, I'd appreciate it if you hit that subscriber button. Otherwise, stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.